It's a difficult topic, this, because it goes far beyond the literal suggestion and meaning as we read of it in the text, and also has a profound effect on the nature of the universe and the world we live in. So really, in discussion of Pri Etz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, good and bad, we're really talking about life itself. Today I want to take a particular aspect of it, and that particular aspect of it deals with what it is that we're actually seeing with our eyes, what is that we're actually hearing with our ears, what do our senses really pick up. And we're going to look at the metaphor of a mirror and what a mirror does for us. And let me begin by saying that the mirror already provides us with a rather interesting notion, as we see in the opening statement there. The reflection in the mirror may be imperfect and distorted, yet it also reveals what lies behind you where you normally can't see. Meaning, a mirror reflects you, but also reflects what's behind you. We don't have 360-degree vision, and even if we are a samurai warrior, we don't actually see it with our eyes. We see it with our third eye. And therefore, if we use that metaphor of the mirror, on the one hand, it reflects and we'll see possibly distorts, but at the same time, it reveals. And we're going to see that's the nature of the world. But before we go there, let's have a look at some of the source material from the Chumash and the Tanakh. We're going to analyze in passing names of God. Now, names are something very, very profound in Jewish spiritual teachings. Giving of a name is the singular occasion when a human being possesses complete prophecy. Our masters tell us. When you give a name to your child, that is a moment of absolute insight that relates directly to your child. Not affects your child, but reveals your child in ways that we may never really understand. But it's a very true reflection. Therefore, a name relates to the essence, but a name is the most external feature of it. When I call out a name, you're not actually seeing anything, you're even just hearing something. And yet through hearing something, it relates to the essence of what it is that the word suggests. Similarly, God in our tradition has names. It's not a singular name. There are very specific names, and the Kabbalists explain the meanings of some of these names, all of these names in fact. And there are names like Elokim, there are names like Adonai, there are names like Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, which we don't even pronounce, but just spell, etc., etc. And what is a name at the end of the day? It's some external point which we can begin to have some momentary insight into the essence of what that is. So, if you were to be an individual who works for the Mossad, you might have several New Zealand passports at your fingertips, okay? And in so doing, you'd have different identities. And if you're a really good agent, you would assume those identities, persona and all. Hashem is a pretty good Mossad agent and assumes these persona in different aspects of life. So if we're going to speak tonight in terms of the word Elokim, which I pronounce with a k, not a hey, her, because that's another way of not expressly pronouncing it, we're talking about the God that hides through nature. And when I'm going to speak in terms of the name of God, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, I'm talking about the nature of God that's absolutely revealing. And therefore, we're going to analyze these two terms and analyze the world as an expression of these two opposite poles. One of the ways that we refer to these names is in apposition to each other, not opposition, but next to each other, juxtaposition. And it says, for example, in Psalms, in the second source material here, for Hashem God, and that's Yud-Kei Vav-Kei and the word Elokim, both together, is a sun and a shield. So we're going to look at this dichotomy of sun and shield, that which reveals and that which hides, which is a sheath or a shield around something, preventing either being apparent or preventing its effect to the same extent. That's another little notion that we're going to have to consider. And then we have a third verse here from Exodus, I shall dwell, and the word is shachanti, amongst them. And again, the word Shechanti will relate to the name of God known as Shechina, which is the feminine side of the Godhead, and presents the feminine and nurturing side of existence. So we're going to have to look at that aspect of the name. And then we come to the various statements that allude to a mirror effect. For example, in Devarim it says, I, Hashem, make myself known to him in a mar'eh. Now usually the word mar'eh means a vision, but it also can be interpreted in terms of a mirror. What is a vision? What is a vision that the prophets had? The prophets, when we say vision, we're not talking about being able to see the exactitude of what we would normally see. We use the word vision in different ways in English. We see it as a projection, we see it as some sort of future scenario, but the way we're using it here, vision means an imperfect view in some form that is an analogy to reality. So the prophets, when they saw things in a vision, were not able to use words to actually describe it in a way that they saw. They have to stretch their vocabulary in order to be able to describe it in some shape or form. You remember Yecheskel's vision, Ezekiel's famous vision of the chariot, and the vision where he sees these four animalistic beings around the chariot, the lion, the eagle, etc. And then there's a person seated on the throne. So he's using language that you and I would be able to relate to, but what he actually saw goes far beyond that. And yet these very words somehow allude to it. So the word here, mar'eh, although vision, also means reflection. It's a reflection of reality in a less than real way. Another verse that we're going to come to is the verse that we say every Friday night on Shabbos in the tribute to the woman of the home, Eshes Chayil. And it says there, the wife of valor is the crown of her husband. And we're going to analyze husband and wife in context of the mirror image and how a mirror or form of glazed silver-lined material can actually increase the capacity of that which it is reflecting. And we're going to see the relationship of wife and husband is that the wife has the capacity to raise the standard of the husband, and we're talking obviously in spiritual terms, etc. In normative terms also. And finally, we have a clear statement of the notion of reflection in the Song of Songs. Let me see your reflection. Why doesn't the author, King Solomon, say, let me see you? Why does, in this rather highly emotional display of loving terminology, which is what Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, is all about. It's a love sonnet between a man and a woman, but at a more profound level, he's writing about peoplehood, Jewish peoplehood and God as being the lovers, but it's exemplified through lovers of man and woman. The man says, let me see your reflection. Why reflection? Why not, in fact, you? So we're going to see that a reflection has many different possibilities. So all this by way of introduction, just to get us to have a sense of what we're going to be doing here. And why is it at all relevant? Because what happened in Gan Eden, where the tree of knowledge was the higher reality. And we're going to next week speak about the banishment from Gan Eden, away from the tree of knowledge, Eitz Hadas, away from the tree of life, Eitz HaChaim, into the mirror, into the reflection, which is the world in which we live. But that is how it's relating to tonight's discussion. So, let's have a look at some of the points of discussion. First, let's have a look at a very famous comparison that takes place in Hasidic teachings of Kabbalah. Just as the sun consumes any independent light of a candle in the sun's orb, so does infinity consume any notion of finity. Hence, Tsimsum, withdrawal, contraction, occurs so that a sense of independence can be achieved. Elokim is that attribute of Tsimsum. Let's analyze that. Firstly, raising the same kind of similes we did last week in terms of if you have a candle burning and that candle burning is then placed in the orb of the sun, the philosophical question, does that candle have any reality whatsoever? We know full well that the radiance of the sun is such that it makes totally meaningless the light of a candle, but does it have any independent reality? So ultimately we say no, it doesn't have any independent reality, it's completely subsumed. So we're going to say the world is infinite, everything's infinity. We're going to say that everything is hidden or masked or reflected so it appears real. Table appears real, chairs appear real, you and I appear real. But at the same time, we are absolutely absorbed in the infinity of creation. What is the obvious question? If that's the case, how come I can see you, you can see me, we can communicate, and we have the appearance of independence? So we're going to see that's part of the teaching of Tsimsum, that there's a possibility of living, so to speak, in the arena of infinity and yet maintain a seeming reality. So that's what that first idea is. Now, Tsimsum is therefore that quality that Hashem allows to exist, to hide itself so you and I can exist. Tsimsum, withdrawal, contraction, allowing something else to exist. Contracting infinity so finity can exist. A dominant parent might learn that dominance is a very poor mechanism of teaching a child and therefore withdraws that dominance to give some sense of independence to the child. This is part of the process of Tsimsum. My love for someone can be so profuse and so strong that I can overwhelm that person with my love, and that's unwise, and therefore I momentarily withdraw some level of that love so that the amount that filters through is appropriate to the moment, to the situation. A teacher of physics may wish to impress the excitement of physics so much on his or her student that he will teach the theory of relativity of Einstein to the point where every single aspect of it is on a large whiteboard, and thereby so confuse the student that the student will never want to study physics again. But if the teacher says this student is not yet ready to accept and understand the theory of relativity, so I will hide it. How will I hide it? In the following famous little story about Einstein, when a young man asked him, please teach me the theory of relativity. So Einstein asked the young man, do you know any physics? No. Do you know any math? No. Perfect, said Einstein. You're the perfect student. It's simple. This is relativity. If you're sitting on a couch with your girlfriend for a minute, it'll feel like a mere 5 seconds. Time will fly. But if you're sitting on a very hot stove for a mere 5 seconds, it'll feel like a full minute. There it is, the theory of relativity. And that's what he would say, and he would pique the interest of the student. What do you really mean? You mean time is relative? And that way, by hiding the complexity in the simplicity, we have the opportunity of a true communication. This is another example of Tsimsum. When Tsimsum at a cosmic level becomes expressed in our personality, as I alluded to in one of the previous examples, because everything that's out there is in here, And therefore, I have the capacity of Tsimsum, and that's with the aptitude called Gevurah. I have two equal and opposite emotional tendencies, as you've heard me say. One is Chesed, outward flow, sharing, contributing, compassion, and the like. And then we have an equal and opposite tendency, which is like this: withdrawal, self-containment, and limitation. Now, each has their particular function and role. It's no good to be always like that, because you can be so compassionate that you can actually ruin the child by saying yes every single time to all the demands of the child. So you have to temper that chesed flow with a level of gevurah, self-containment, and sometimes express the assertive no. Gevurah, because Gevurah is... It's yes. Now, what is strength? Let's ask ourselves: if the word Gevurah means strength, and I gave it its sense of self-containment, self-limitation, etc., what could be the connection? So, in the Pirkei Avos, in the section of the Mishnah that deals with the wisdom teachings of the ancient masters, and literally called the chapters of the fathers, it says, Ezehu HaGibor, who is the true strong individual, HaKovesh Es Yitzrei, the one who is able to practice self-containment, or literally to withhold his negative or her negative inclination. Anything which is withhold, but it does, both Chesed and Gevurah are either good or bad, meaning you can have good chesed and bad chesed. You can have good giving and bad giving. An example of bad giving is called blackmail. Bribery. All right? I'm giving, but it's a real take. I really want something much more in return. But it's still a perverse act of chesed. It's chesed in a perverse form. So you can have negative sharing and giving, and you can have obviously positive sharing and giving. Likewise with Gevurah. With Gevurah you can have negative withholding, stinginess, or you can have wise withholding, an assertive no to a child. Practicing tough love. Okay? So each one of those aptitudes can be filtered through our positive disposition and our negative disposition. The negative disposition being the ego self, as we said, and the positive disposition being our compassionate self or other-centered self.
Gevurah, the b and the v, is that tense makes a change of sound, or just different?
It's a grammatical rule in terms of after chirik, the next letter gets a dot, so it becomes gibor. Okay. So when we, going back to your question, we haven't quite dealt with it. Strength, what's strength? If we talk about physical strength, when you practice physical strength, what are your muscles doing? Contracting. Contracting. Okay? When you're practicing arm wrestling, you're contracting the muscle. Okay? And he who contracts better is the one who wins, and therefore is a gibor, physically strong. Likewise, at an emotional level, the strength of emotionality, as that teaching in Pirkei Avos says, is self-containment at an emotional level, meaning contracting your emotions at a time when it's appropriate and wise to so contract, etc. Okay? So, but all aspects of Gevurah, which is usually also translated as heroism. And what's heroism? Heroism means to so contract yourself single-mindedly towards some act that you're able to imbue your activity with the strength of being able to carry it out. So that's why Gibor has the notion of strength attached to it, but both positive and negative. And that's an aspect of Tsimsum in the world. So you can have things that are hidden, and are hidden for the wrong reasons, or hidden for the right reasons. Since God, by definition, is perfect, we're going to assume that he hid infinity for the right reasons. And that right reason had everything to do with our capacity to exercise choice and sense independence and live a world of meaning, live a life of meaning. Okay? Looking at the next discussion point in terms of this, in the human analog, it's represented by the emotion of Gevurah, as we've just said, rulership, judgment, sternness. Now, for example, in order to rule, let's use the old-fashioned picture of a king ruling, because often in our literature we do have resorts to this particular imagery, because that was the common imagery of the time. But it would apply to any circumstance where there is a commander and a commanded, whether it's in military or whether it's in police enforcement or whatever it might be, etc. If there's intimacy in the relationship, it makes ruling difficult. A CEO of a company might decide that the way he or she should create a high product company is by keeping his or her distance, because if we come too close, it creates jealousies, appearance of favoritism, but more importantly, if you get close to someone, it's very hard to tell them off. So there may well be that kind of, there may be other circumstances in other companies or organizations where that doesn't apply as well. But that's the example that's given here. A king who becomes too intimate with his or her subjects finds it difficult to rule.
Is it like Shimshon Hagibor?
Sorry?
Shimshon Hagibor.
Shimshon was strong physically.
Strong, but also he was a ruler.
He was also
A ruler. He was the chief.
Yeah, absolutely. Might have extended in both respects. And now we come to Shechina. Shechina is the inner presence of the creative force, but incognito, camouflaged as nature, physics, chemistry, and paralleling the sphere of Malchus, sovereignty. The world that we live in is camouflaged. But as we said in the opening statements, it's deliberately camouflaged so that we can create a sense of independence. One of the very, very famous philosophers of all time was a guy by the name of Benedict Spinoza. You may have heard the name Spinoza. He was born Baruch Spinoza. He was Jewish, but he was excommunicated from the Jewish community and became very important in the Christian teachings, and in fact adopted the Christian name of Benedict. But Spinoza, in passing, taught a very famous teaching. He said, God is nature. Now, when we study the Hasidic teachings of Kabbalah, we say God is nature. When Baruch Spinoza said it, he was excommunicated. When we say it, everyone says, wow. So how come? What was so wrong when one person said it and another movement said it? Because there was a difference. When Hasidus teaches that God is nature, it also adds two extra words. God is nature and more. Spinoza limited God to nature, which is very Buddhist in many respects. A very, very karmic notion that really everything is part of this continuing wheel of change, and that it has its own inertia and its own format of centripetalism or centrifugal kind of thing. Now, when we say and more, what we're saying is, yeah, God is nature. When I look at a beautiful flower, I'm looking at some aspect of the energy of Hashem flowing through the makeup at a chemical and physical level of the plant to produce this absolute beauty that inclines to the sun and uses up chlorophyll and what have you, etc., etc. But all this is camouflage for what really is the spiritual energy that becomes converted, so to speak, into nature. But you have to say and more, because if we identify God simply with nature, then there is no longer meaning. There's no longer idea that there is a force or power that's involved, that guides, that provides the energy for maintenance, etc. A human being cannot conceive of a perpetual motion machine that operates in its own right. We can't begin to imagine something that doesn't have a beginning and end. And although it's popular both in philosophy and in some spiritual teachings to say there is no such thing as beginning or end, and really everything is simply as it is, and there isn't more and there isn't less, but that's a bit of a cop-out, because that is meaningless to say that. It may be very, very impressive to say that, and it may be very impactful to say that, and it may be pseudo-intellectual to say that, but it is, at the end of the day, philosophically, absolutely meaningless. From our vantage point, there is a beginning and there is an end. That's the way the human mind is constructed. Outside of the human mind, there isn't a beginning and end. So, for example, we say that we're located in the world of Asiya, one of the realms of spiritual creation. This is the only realm of time and space. And this is the realm that's got the idea of beginning and end. But the world above it, Yetzirah, has no time and space. And it has no notion of beginning and end. Yet that world is completely tangible and physical compared to the one above it, making it look rather simplistic, and onwards towards infinity, whatever infinity is. So when we talk about the Shechina here, we're talking about the way the world appears to us. Without the Shechina, there would not be tables, there would not be chairs, there wouldn't be a manifestation. The very fact that there's tables and chairs and human beings and physical things means that there is a beginning process, that there is an energetic force at a spiritual level that translates into finite physical energy, and that physical energy is interchangeable with matter, and the matter can be made up in terms of atoms and molecules and collection of molecules and building onwards and onwards. But it begins somewhere. It's like if you blow a balloon, what happens when you stop blowing? It stops growing. Okay? Likewise with the world. If God doesn't blow its balloon, the world ceases immediately. Okay? It relapses, if you will. And that's what Shechina is. So because Shechina is the presence within the world and nurtures the world, it also has a feminine tendency. Whereas Elokim is a masculine tendency, Shechina is a feminine tendency. So you have this dualistic attribute of things in terms of God, masculinity and femininity. This became expressed as Adam and Chava. The masculine and feminine side of the Godhead became expressed as Adam and Eve, and then became expressed as men and women throughout history. We all possess a likeness to the divine, but a woman and a man has some very distinct characteristics. They aren't the same. They are equal. Why are they equal? Because they each have their own particular purpose, and the second one can't duplicate the first one. Men cannot duplicate the whole purpose of womanhood, and women can't duplicate the whole process of manhood. So each is got its strength in its arena, and there's equality in that respect. But at the same time, they're functionally different. So one of the functionalities of the feminine side of the cosmos is to nurture. So if I go back to the abstract, let me tell you that there are two Sefirot called Chochmah and Bina. Chochmah and Bina make up the nature of cosmic intellect. Don't worry what that means. That's very abstract. You and I, however, possess an intellect. We can relate to that. We have some part of us that triggers ideas from the subconscious to the conscious. I mean, the idea doesn't just pop into your head because of some accident. It doesn't just pop into your head random, although it might appear like that. The way that you go fishing in the pond of your subconsciousness is part of your personality profile. The thoughts that you are able to draw out of your subconscious and think about is part of your personality. Other people think differently, which means that they fish different thought fish from the pond of subconsciousness. That's Bina, the process of fishing. But what happens once the thought is there, the beginning of the thought, the inspirational aspect? You then develop it into longitude, latitude, you give it dimension, you give it a thought process, you're going to lead to some conclusion. So you have the spur that brings it into the consciousness, a thought pops into your head, and then you have the second stage of developing that thought because you need to for whatever reason. Those two terms are Chochmah and Binah. Chochmah is masculine relative to Binah's femininity. I've taken a very abstract idea and shown you now how masculine and femininity operate. In other words, because Binah takes the Chochmah spark and evolves it, nurtures it for teasing it out. It comes out of the womb of the Binah then as a complete notion. Binah is the part that carries the child, the thought, for its 9 months or split second. But it came from a moment of conception, which was the Chochmah, where the male element was involved. So when we speak in Kabbalah and Hasidus in terms of masculinity, femininity, is far from the classic ideas that we have of everyday life. And I'll show you it's all relative. So for example, I just said Chochmah is masculine relative to Binah. Chochmah and Binah and Da'at and Chesed and Gevurah and Tiferet and Exile and Hod and Yesod are all masculine relative to the last one, Malchut. Don't worry even what that means. It doesn't matter what it means. But suddenly the feminine personality of Binah became masculine relative to something else. So masculine and femininity are relative terms. Therefore, in both men and women, we possess both characteristics. Men possess latent feminine characteristics, and women possess latent masculine characteristics. And sometimes we assert one, and sometimes we assert the other. Women sometimes have to assert masculine characteristics at certain aspects of interrelationship, and men sometimes have to assert feminine characteristics in some context of setting. And we have a choice. But man is a man because the dominant flow is masculine in a man, and the dominant flow is feminine in a woman, but we still have a mixture of both. So just as in the same way the Sefirot connect and conceive and give birth to human behavior within us, similarly, man and woman can only combine because there are commonalities. If a woman was so utterly different of being absolute feminine, a man was so utterly different as being absolute masculine, there would not be the capacity for combination, which creates the beauty and the strength of relationship. I'm saying these ideas without going through a logical deductive process, but trying to show you how they operate in terms of the world. Shechina is feminine relative to Elokim. That was the upshot of that discussion. All right?
How would you translate that?
Chochmah is koachma, the potential of what is, and Binah is the process of cogitation that takes the potential and actualizes it. Want to go through all of them? Da'at is connection, absolute connection. Da'at is the bond that bonds Chochmah and Binah, creates the marriage between Chochmah and Binah, the marriage between inspiration and thought flow, which results in conclusive behavior. We can go on and go further, but it's not the subject matter here at the present. Okay. Now, when we speak about Tsimsum, which is the next discussion note here, Tsimsum is not, however, a process of an illusionist trick by the divine magician. In other words, God isn't hiding the sun's immense glare so that the candle can have its sense of independence. It's not a trick, as it says, it's not a maya, which is an Eastern term for illusion. It's not a hallucinatory dream. It is has a reality in its own right, but one that hides and screens Yud Kei Vav Kei creative energy flow. It's like putting hands in front of your eyes. If I put my hands in front of my eyes, do I stop existing? I don't. And yet I can't see myself, okay? But I'm there. So the facade of the world is like, if you will, putting your hands over your eyes. So you no longer can perceive the glare of the sun. At the same time, there's awareness of what is possible. You can take the metaphor a little bit further. You know, we can't look at the sun, but on the other hand, we can look at the reflection of the sun. When the moon interposes between the sun and the earth, we call that an eclipse. So when there's an eclipse, you know, we always go out there and want to see the eclipse. And those who know tell us you shouldn't look directly at the sun in the course of eclipse. So what do? You create some sort of, either you put on glasses, or what we used to do, we used to look at a reflection of it, right? And you watch it in some third-party reflection and the like. So this is exactly the same. Hashem, in other words, eclipses itself so that we can see it in a reflection elsewhere. Our life is living in that reflection. And we're going to develop that idea a bit further in terms of our reflection. So there's a reality to our reflection, and we're going to see there is a higher reality than what we think. It's not a mere reflection. But before that, one more little notion which introduces a bit of next week: Golus, exile. What is exile? What is Golus in Galut, in the sense of the cosmos that we're talking about? Is cosmically the exile of the Shechina. Now, what we mean by that is this. It doesn't mean literally exile. After all, you can't say God went AWOL and simply disappeared and what have you, and just exiled. And yet we speak about the Shechina being in exile. Shechina is in exile when you and I no longer recognize there's something beyond the table, beyond the human being, and beyond. When we no longer see it, that means the Shechina is in exile. In other words, exile means our non-recognition. You have a very good friend, and you have an argument, and thereby your friend leaves you, doesn't want to have anything to do with you because of the argument, right? Your friend is in exile, meaning, relatively speaking, the friend is in exile because I have driven him away. I don't want that friendship anymore, what have you. But at a profounder level, there's something real that took place. I mean, the fact that we spent 5-10 years in very close friendship is something very real. There is this exile at the moment, but there's something much more profound that connected us. It's now in a state of disarray, whatever might be the case. Likewise, in terms of the Shechina in the world, I have a very personal relationship with the Shechina. But if I, at some point, don't recognize it, I'm not mindful. I eat my food gluttonously. I don't recognize the spiritual energy behind the food that I, as a human being, have been given the gift to elevate. In that moment, the Shechina is in exile. That's what we mean by exile. And that becomes relevant next week when we speak about Adam and Chava being exiled from Gan Eden, from the Garden of Eden. And we'll come across that. Okay, now we come to the interesting part about the mirror. The Shechina is also seen in Kabbalah as a mirror. Now, what's the nature of a mirror? What is a mirror? A mirror reflects reality. A mirror distorts reality. You go to Luna Park and you look into those funny mirrors and you see yourself very thin and you like yourself, and then you see yourself very fat and you no longer like yourself, okay? A mirror distorts and a mirror reflects. A mirror also obstructs. If I take this mirror, pretend this is a mirror, and I'm looking at myself in the mirror, there's a strange thing. I can't see what's immediately behind the mirror. The mirror is obstructing my view of the grapes. So here's another ironical aspect. The mirror reflects me, which is wondrous, but at the same time it hides what's behind the mirror. And yet it's got an advantage. It can, in me looking in the mirror, show me what's behind me, though, which I cannot see. So in some sense, it hides, in some sense, it reveals, and in some sense, it merely reflects. Now, this is going to be a very important aspect of our discussion here. How does a mirror operate? You know how a mirror operates? It's got this silver lining, right? And it's got the glass at the right thickness. And somehow, because of that, the way the light falls on it allows the light to be perfectly reflected, and that's how a mirror operates. Elokim is a mirror. The name Elokim reflects the reality. But just as a mirror obstructs what's behind the mirror, so does Elokim obstruct Yud K Vav K. So does the brightness of the sun be contained so that the candle can have a sense of independence. So this is the aspect of the mirror, the name Elokim. So when we said in the earlier verse, when we quoted the source material, for Hashem God is Yud Kei Vav Kei Elokim, is a sun and a shield at the same time, we're talking about one being the sun, Yud Kei Vav Kei, and the name Elokim being the shield. So you have both at the same time the absolute source, but you have also the reflected source, which we can then tolerate and exist in. And the same way as you put on glasses, sunglasses, or even more deeper glasses to be able to withstand the sun's strength, similarly, God put glasses for all of us to wear and see the world via the mechanism of Elokim. So, the name Elokim is to cover the surface and reflect the original. The effect is Tsimsum. So now let's have a look how the words connect. Tsimsum is the process, the resultant process, hiding, containing, withdrawing, so we're not blinded by the original light. The shield that we put on, the glasses that we wear, is called Elokim. So whenever you come into the study of Chumash and you came across the name Elokim, Vayomer Elokim, God said, we're talking about some aspect of God that is hiding reality, withdrawing, or sternness, or judgment, or Gevurah, withdrawal. So for example, when punishment is described in the Chumash, it's always Elokim. And it's always associated with the name Elokim, because that's the manifestation for consequences, correction. There's no such thing as punishment in the sense that we old-fashioned think about it. It's a corrective measure that we're talking about. But the corrective measure is a stern one very often. Sometimes you do have to have a consequence for the child's misbehavior. You love your child, but no, you will not be able to go to the football today, and no, you will not be able to have the ice cream today. I love my child, but I have to put on that facade which hides my chesed through Gevurah, so it's wise in the way that I'm raising my child for value clarifications and the like.
Can it also be used as like a respectful term? Like I'm referring to the three Malachim, Elokim, my lords.
Oh yes, the word can be used in other ways. It's used as word messenger and angelic beings, but we're not using it in this way here. It's just another use of the word altogether. Now, it's very interesting that when we talk about this analogy further, we can see other aspects of it. You can have mirrors that enhance and magnify. We call them microscopes. Okay, the use of interface of glazings in such a way that it reveals what otherwise is hidden. We can use these to bring things closer to us so we can analyze them and see them. They're called telescopes. And we can look around corners, and these are called periscopes. Okay? So if we take that analogy further, that is what Elokim does. It allows us also to have a microscopic view, and a telescopic view, and a periscopic view. What does that mean? We use our mind to investigate. Our mind goes through all sorts of different corners and around corners in order to bring things together. And we call that insight. It's the light of the mind. And that is only possible because it's ultimately shielding the brightness of infinity, which would make no thought possible, no human being possible, no investigation possible whatsoever. So that's just another way of looking at the notion of Elokim. And now we come to the other quote about the wife being the crown of her husband, which some will say, oh, well, that's very, very nice, and isn't this simply perhaps a little platitude which men say so that women feel that they're important and we care about them, etc.? No, Eishes Chayil is not just an ode to the woman, it's the ode to the feminine side of the cosmos, which the woman represents, or has a dominant aspect, personality of. The wife is the Shechina. In other words, womanhood is the personification of the feminine side of the cosmos. And the mirror enhances the husband, referred to as the crown. And this is the principle of Or Choser. Or Choser means returning light or reflection. Okay? There's Or Yashar, which is as you look straight, you can see things. But there's Or Choser, which means there's certain light that bounces back, and that's like what a mirror is. Now, what does that mean? As I said before, you can have aspects of the mirror that enhance, that are able to define, whether they're microscope, whether they're telescope, etc., look around corners, and then you've got this facility of looking at the mirror and seeing what's behind you. That's what a woman is. A woman has those aptitudes. Men don't. We see it in very subtle ways. I mean, sometimes we call it in womanhood intuition, right? That's one way of its expression. But it's even something more profound than intuition. A woman has aptitudes at insight which a man doesn't possess. Man possesses prowess in certain ways that a woman doesn't possess. But since here we're talking in terms of insight, always trust your wife. Always trust the woman. It's just a golden rule in life. Not because of shalom bayis, having peace in the home, but because it really does work. Okay? So when we talk about the ode to the woman and say the wife is the way that the man is built up, it's because she has the insight. And generally, even in common parlance or in common books describing relationships, it's almost inevitable that it's always that the woman knows how to tame the man, and rarely about the man being able to tame the women, as if one could be taming at all. That's a very poor use of the verb anyway in those books. But there is something about women being able to manage men much better than men being able to manage women. And that's part of what nurture, Shechina, and femininity is. Man has other assets which woman doesn't possess. Brute strength, for number one. The tendency of advancement, going out into the world, which is negatively sometimes viewed as conquest, but it means exploration. That is a man's tendency. A man will play forever with his little machineries of computer and camera, etc., etc., and women will do the important things of raising the next generation, okay? We know what that's all about. All right. Okay. So, the body is the mirror reflecting the light of the soul. Now we're going to see the juxtaposition of body and soul. In other words, the soul is infinity. It's part of the Godhead. Therefore, you and I can't experience it, or we would be swallowed in the way that a candle is in the sun. So the body becomes the reflection, the mirror of the soul. Not a literal mirror, because it becomes the medium for the soul's expression, but reflects what the soul is all about. So if I know you better, and I can describe you as a very, very insightful person, or a very, very happy person, or an individual who has remarkable leadership, etc., I'm looking at your behavior in the world, but I'm really looking at a reflection of your soul. That's what your giftedness of your soul is all about. And likewise, this is the purpose of creation of Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. And Adam and Chava were the personification in terms of the masculinity, Elokim, and the femininity, which comes in terms of Shechina and that juxtaposition, which is the world at large. So, just as a mirror conceals what is behind it, it is through this very concealment that is revealed what is behind the reflection. We're repeating what we said earlier. This hiddenness, Tsimsum, ironically reveals. The next statement is very interesting. The shadow is in fact as instructive as is the light. This is the meaning of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, unobstructed light source, and Elokim, the shield, the physical mirror that reveals the deeper dimensions through its concealment. So you can discover through the shadow, often a lot that you can discover in the light. Or the absence of something can be as revealing as it itself. So and I know they speak in some aspects of psychology about the shadow self, but that's more in the quasi-psychological literature, etc. But there is a lot to be said about the notion of absence, the notion of darkness, the notion of shadow, not as a description of ourselves, not as a description, oh, you have a dark side, or you have a dark past. I don't mean it in that respect. I mean that sometimes the absence of certain personality trait is in itself as revealing as another personality trait. Okay? Creating the woman through the reflection allows its opposite, kenegdoi is the word in the Chumash, to become the very means of revealing a higher truth. It says in the opening quote, and Hashem Elokim said, it's not good that Adam be alone. I'll create a partner as his very opposite. And it's very interesting, they're very opposite. There are many explanations of that very opposite. Rashi has a very cute explanation. It says, if you really get on with your wife well, she'll be a great help to you. On the other hand, if you don't do the right thing by her, she'll be your enemy for life. In other words, opposite you, in completely opposite what your needs are, etc. But at a more profound level, what we're saying is that the woman possesses the reflective quality that reflects. It's opposite the man. The man looks in the mirror, and it's the woman that reflects back and is able to be provided with a vision behind, etc. But at the same time, you cannot see the grapes behind the mirror. So that's part and parcel of the process also. You are a man, and you cannot see life as a woman. I think God is usually referred to as he in most of the literature because it's very awkward to keep talking about he, she, it in the one breath. I think it's just a convention. And if you prefer she, by all means, I usually try to use it just to keep everyone happy. But there's no he, she. God is masculinity and femininity potential in the one being. So quite correctly, it's neither he or she. These are just personal pronouns we use in common parlance.
Can we expand the idea of opposites to say that it's something to do with the duality, that there is more, this is maybe just
Well, everything is masculine and feminine in relative terms. So when we speak about the dualities of life, and we speak about the ebb and flow of life, or we talk about night and day, and we talk about all of energy and tiredness, etc., we can analyze them all in context of masculinity and femininity also. But that will be a very interesting but lengthy exploration to extend it to that.
You might say the word Adam refers to man and woman because they're created as unity. Then the woman was separated as a separate, even though she's separate, still considered as one unity.
Yeah, because ultimately it's a man-woman composite, and we still maintain that man-woman composite, both in man and woman. What was originally Adam? Adam originally was a man-woman composite. It was in the one being. It's not that Adam was masculine and there was some creation of a rib that became somehow feminine. And no, it's not like that at all. Adam was man, woman in the one form, and it was deliberately separated out to have predominantly feminine and predominantly masculine in order to be able to create relationship. And relationship is the meaning of life, as Viktor Frankl points out. Next week, banishment from Gan Eden, our life's condition as we find it today.